ವ್ಯರ್ಥವೆಂದೆನಿ ಪೊದಲ ಸೃಷ್ಟಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಬಹುಭಾಗ ಅರ್ಥವೆಂ ಕ್ರಿಮಿ ಕೀಟ ಕೋಟಿ ರಚನೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಕರ್ತನಾಲೋಚಿಸದೊಂದವನೆಂಬ ನುಡಿ ಎದ್ದ ದೃಷ್ಟಿಯ ವಿವರ ಮಂಕುತಿಮ್ಮ. Why do lot of creations in this world seem a waste? What is the meaning of microorganisms in this creation? If one thinks that the creator is at error and there is no meaning to this, then it reflects his own half-baked vision. Mankutima. Good evening, members. Here Ravindra Korea, Chairman of Bangalore branch of SRS of ICI, wholeheartedly welcome all the members for the 85th Jnana Dasova live webcast session from Bangalore branch. Today's topic is an entirely different topic, and the new maybe the very limited practitioners, I hope, and our motto Jnana Dasova to make it available for all the members. So that's the reason that today's topic has been scheduled, that is IBOR transition, what it means and why it matters. We have with two eminent speakers to address this session. CA Mangrish A. Gaitunde from Mumbai. So on behalf of all the viewers and managing committee members of Bangalore branch, I wholeheartedly welcome CA Mangrish for the today's session. Welcome you, sir. The another speaker, the session scheduled and the moderating and addressing for the members, there is none other than our own members from Bangalore, CA Asha M with us. On behalf of all the viewers and managing committee members of Bangalore branch, I wholeheartedly welcome Madam CA Asha M for the today's session. Welcome you, Madam.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Dear members, yes, Bangalore branch is keep on trying to have a different sessions based on the requirement of the members, and the today's session regarding interbank offered rate, and earlier we used to LIBOR, and when we are learning in FEMA, this all to be mentioned and to be used, and a little bit we are going in the other side of practice, maybe this external borrowings and financial series industries are keen into this IBOR and LIBOR, etc. So our motto of this session, Madam Asha is carried out this session to address members and the requirements, and I also request Madam to how the young generation now newly qualified chartered accountant take into this practice. The last week also we used to discuss with CA Narendra Jain about when we had sessions on transfer pricing. The members thought that yes, this is a different game ball, the different where we, if you learn also where we get client, etc. So many things will come, but little bit you are in the front of practice in this area. So if you are able to address 5-10 minutes, so it will be more important for our members to learn, and after that we can start make it their this Jnana Dasova session as earning also. With that note, I wholeheartedly welcome all the members for the registering for the today's session, 85th session Jnana Dasova live webcast session. Dear members, this month, November month, it is a 10th session, as institute is allowed us to conduct only 10 VCMs per month. Accordingly, November month is the 10th, and all put together we come to an 85th session today. And again, there are a lot of members from the 16th November, the institute has allowed to conduct physical programs. Still, we are in dilemma there. We are getting many requests from the members. Sir, please continue at least till December. Yes, I can understand. Again, December is the schedule for our tax audit and all. We said, yes, we are also thinking in MC to what best can be serve for the members. And also we have scheduled the Kalakriti 2020 on coming Saturday at 4 p.m. at Bangalore branch premises. We are trying how physical program will be, because after 8 months, last program we held in 11th March, and again after that our branch Narayanan Sabha Bhavan is waiting to receive members for the Kalakriti. I request members to please come and because all COVID related precautions we have taken. So I request members to attend this program. Sri Mukhyamantri Chandru and Muraj Vaskote is the guest to address in Kalakriti, and also our own members performing Yakshagana and other activities. With that note, members, I wholeheartedly welcome you for today's session, and also I wholeheartedly welcome today's speakers, CA Mangrish and Madam Asha for the session. I request Bangalore Branch Secretary Srinivas to formally introduce both the speaker to the all the viewers. Over to Srinivas.
Thank you, Chairman, for rendering the welcome address. It's my proud privilege to give a brief introduction of both the speakers. Very interesting topic on IBOR transition, what it means and why it matters. They are going to explain in detail. To handle this session, we have two eminent speakers, none other than Mangrish and CA Asha. CA Mangrish is joining from Bombay, and CA Asha, our own Bangalore branch member, always helping hand. First I'll give a brief introduction of CA Mangrish. Is a director in E&Y. He leads financial services clients and has extensive working with banks, insurance clients. With this brief introduction, I present before you CA Mangrish. Welcome you, sir. We have with us another eminent speaker, none other than CA Asha, Director of E&Y, worked on the financial reporting areas and serving extensive accounting change in IFRS project, assisting global clients in critical accounting matters, presented papers on various forums. With this brief introduction, I present before you CA Asha. Welcome you, madam.
Thank you, sir.
I
Thank you
also
so much.
welcome all the members and viewers. Those are actively participating in this program. Thank you. Over to you, madam.
Sure,
Before
sir.
Madam
Thank you.
Asha, Madam, just 1 minute. Members, next week we have scheduled our next Jnanadasa version for the December month, December 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. The 3 sessions has been planned. After that, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, we had a 52nd SRC conference. It is in virtual mode. We don't have any scheduled programs. So our Bangalore branch program will be first week of December, and second week we are taking off for the SRC conference. Since it is virtual, we have to take and we have to support SRC. And after that, again, it will be continue third week and fourth week. And fourth week, we are planning the women's virtual conference from Bangalore branch. Since Asha Madam is representing the women members, and so just I thought to mention it. So over to Madam.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And I will be there in the women's conference for sure. I've been moderating quite a few sessions in the last years. It's a pleasure. So let me know if you can see the screen. I've shared the presentation. Is it visible?
Yes, it is visible. Yeah.
No,
Not yet. It is just starting.
Okay. I'll just wait maybe for half second. Let me know whenever you can see the screen.
This screen is a Kalakriti. It is an 28th program. Just 1 minute. They will share it. Okay.
Should I reshare
Nitin.
it?
Nitin, you can share it to the madam's screen.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, madam, you can share now.
It's already shared. I'll just wait for you to confirm.
You can share it now, madam. Now I give present it to you. Please share.
All right, 1 second. Sorry about this. Okay, I've shared it now. Can you see?
Yes.
Yeah, it's coming.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Good evening to all the members. Thank you for taking time this evening and being participating to listen on this IBOR transitions. The way me and Mangrish would be leading the sessions, and we'll not really keep it too technical and very banking oriented. What we'll try do in this session is talk about what on account of IBOR would have an implication on the profession, and what are those accounting and reporting issues that one has to consider from an IBOR angle. So that's how we'll focus it. Of course, in order to get there, we'll have to know the basics of what is IBOR transition. A lot of people have been talking about IBORs, LIBORs, etc., but not many of us would focus on this topic. But natural, because it's very niche and it's not something which will impact a large, small scale sectors. But whom will it impact? Just to get the attention right, is this transition will impact any client of yours or any any of you who have got loans which are LIBOR linked, right? Which are linked to an interbank offer rate. So you could think of any of your client whose loan portfolio or whose assets or investments or any of the portfolios, if it's an insurance company and if they've got certain cash flows which are all linked to an IBOR related rate, then this particular transition will impact them. So largely, the IBOR transition will impact the financial services sector. Banking, insurance, and wealth asset management will have a huge implication on the other side, because they have to get ready from a system perspective, vendors' point of view, governance, controls, all of that they'll have to ensure, new processes, everything. But from the client perspective who has borrowed funds from a bank, it's only to the extent of that interest that has been linked to LIBOR, the IBOR transition will impact them. So it's about who is on which side of the story. The impact is basis that. For banks, it's a huge implication. I'm sure you've been reading about some of the articles on this. Mangrish will speak about the RBI initiatives from India context. Where are we right now? But from global context, this is definitely a burning issue for many CFOs, and it is on their priority in terms of the number of initiatives that they've taken. IBOR transition is one of the major priority for them. So with that, what we would cover in this session today for the next 1.5 hours or so time is we'll talk about basics about IBOR, just to get into closer about how will this impact our profession and what is it changing from accounting and reporting perspective, and maybe slight indicative timelines, globally, how is this impacting. This is again another global reform. This transition is applicable across the globe, which is what we're going to talk about, that what are these timelines, and if any of your clients have got foreign currency loans or loans which are from from any of the other countries where it is LIBOR linked or IBOR linked, you will actually have to think about immediately bringing LIBOR transition. I'll just pause it here just to confirm, Srinivas sir, I'm clear and audible, right?
Yes, clear and audible, yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, sir. So, and then the third thing that we'll cover is the key risks and challenges, and then regulatory updates. What is, from an Indian context, what does this mean? And Mangrish, who is with us on this call, is actually from Mumbai and been always working with banks and insurance and other asset management clients to help them transition to IBOR. He'll have very good perspectives from the context of an India. What is the updates and what is the updates from RBI, etc. We'll speak about it. And we'll have certain specific terminologies that one should be aware. Like when you're talking to your clients who have loans which are linked to any of the interbank offer rates, then what is that certain terminologies that will impact them? Like, how does the fallback language work? What is contract remediation? Some of these key aspects is what we'll touch upon. We'll not really deep dive too much, but just a brief overview about some of those important aspects, and each functional area considerations. We'll keep it very brief because most of the members on this particular webcast today, I'm hoping, is not really from financial services sector. But having said that, we actually had a discussion to have this extended to most of the financial service sector members as well. And if they are here, to ensure that we don't miss out from the other side of what banks has to do, we also have like some quick pointers on what are the functional area considerations which are applicable more from a bank's perspective, and some definitely, I think, a big area where we come into play, and this is exactly what is our role in the entire IBOR transition, more from a chartered accountant's perspective. What are the accounting considerations, disclosure requirements in IBOR? So with this background, I'll just quickly go to what is exactly IBOR is all about, and what are the basics of IBOR, and why this transition came first of all is I think a little bit of background and a history. So this whole IBOR transition started actually, I mean, IBOR as a concept started very, very long ago. I think somewhere in 1969, JP Morgan is the first bank who actually used an interbank offer rate on one of its 80 million contracts. So it was, I think, way, way back. It was almost, I think, 60s is when a concept of an IBOR started emerging. And then the England banks, the British banks actually started formalizing this and calling it as a rate at which this can be offered to the rest of the banks. So what is IBOR is, as the name suggests, is interbank offer rate. Let's say if I am a bank and if I would want to borrow money, at what rate will I borrow money? And what is the rate at which I am okay to borrow money is actually what IBOR represents. So what IBOR there is a commission which releases an IBOR on a daily basis, and this takes like average of many factors which banks will provide, the data inputs which banks will provide, and we'll have like a mechanism how it works, etc. In the coming couple of minutes we'll talk about it. But each of the banks will submit what is the rate at which if they will borrow, and taking out some low outliers and high outliers, averaging the some of the top transactional banks, the commission, the exchange will release that, okay, this is a rate at which we today offer the borrowings, and this becomes an interbank offer rate at which each bank can borrow from the other bank. So therefore, what are IBORs are the average rates at which certain banks can borrow in the interbank market, right? So these are always averaged out. Now, how do we then come into picture? Because when we go and borrow money from the bank, we are also borrowing at a certain rate, and because it is IBOR linked, it is linked to a particular particular mechanism of deriving the rates. My borrowing is also affected because it's LIBOR linked, right? So the basis the LIBOR keeps changing, the rate at which I have borrowed will also impact to me as the receiver of the loan. So that's exactly where this IBOR transitions have got huge implications for banks, but it also has sizable implications on the receivers of the loans. So these IBORs are published in different tenors. I'm sure some of you can relate basis your portfolios that your clients or you have for that matter, that some are from 3 months to 6 months. It can go up to like 12 months, and some of the rates are also for overnight. So these rates include a spread and a credit risk adjustment. So ideally, when the banks take an average rate, let's say there are like 12 banks which gives the rates, and they take up the 6 banks average rate, there is also a future looking element to it, and they add a credit risk and a spread adjustment to make it more realistic, basically to make it represent the bank's cost of capital, right? So there are some adjustments that goes on, and this is where the game of pricing would come into picture. It's more of FRM, the valuers game, where a lot of valuation aspects will be involved in terms of how each of the products has to be priced, whether bonds or deposits, mortgage, credit cards, loans. How is these products have to be priced considering these rates, right? So this pricing is a specialized task by itself, and I think as we rightly know, like most accountants doesn't get into pricing aspects, and some of the chartered accountants are purely into pricing. So it's a different specialized domain altogether. But the rates which have been published have been adjusted to a spread, which includes the credit risk element of it. Right now, to some of the one immediate question when I was learning about IBOR that came to my mind is, I always thought LIBOR is equal to IBOR, right? So there's no differentiation I could make. But then what I've learned, I think over the period, is that a LIBOR is one component of an interbank offer rate. So LIBORs are actually available in currencies of USD, GBP, EUR, CHR, and JPY. This is a rate which is offered in London interbank market, right? So this is basically representing the London rates. And similarly, there is a TIBOR which is represented in Tokyo, right? Which is part of Tokyo, and the rate offered is in Japan, right? Similarly, there's Euribor which is offered in Euro interbank market. So now we can realize that the IBORs are bases wherever the particular geography is. It could be either called as LIBORs or TIBORs or Euribors, right? Now we'll talk about why this is changing and how this is changing in a while. But before that, who uses these IBOR rates? It's used by different financial service organizations and also the clients to an extent. So it's used by retail banks, hedge funds, non-bank lenders, regulated funds, corporations, private equity investors, asset managers, commercial banks, and of course, certain exchanges have to use IBORs as a medium to transact. And some of the products which you could immediately think about, like, so again, the point of discussion is it's a very niche area. I'm glad that Bangalore branch is organized. People will always have an impact because of this. And then if you look at from the analysis perspective, if one has to say, okay, where do I think this transition will impact me? As I rightly said, wherever the rate is linked, this particular transition will impact. Now, where this rate will be linked, there are certain products that we either on an asset side or a liability side of the balance sheet, we look at it, will be IBOR linked, right? Either it could be LIBOR, TIBOR, or EURIBOR, but it will be linked to one of these IBORs. So we will have bonds, right? Most bonds have interest, all bonds have interest coupons. And if that interest is linked to a LIBOR or a EURIBOR for that matter, so it will again have an impact on account of IBOR transition. Or it could be fixed rate notes, or it could be deposit or mortgage loans or credit cards or any securitized products or over-the-counter derivatives, wherein which the pricing factors, the time value for money and the interest element in it, then of course IBOR has an implication. So this is, I think, in terms of what IBOR really means. I think if you look at today's topic also, what it means and why it matters, we're still talking about what it means, right? And why is this such a big phenomenal impact to the economy? Because if you look at right now, the USD, LIBOR and EURIBOR put together, there are around 370 trillion transactions. That's like innumerable number of transactions which happens in these two particular rates, right? USD LIBORs and EURIBORs put together represents around 370 trillion, which is around 80% of the market exposure, right? And most of these contracts that we're talking about would be anywhere like, between 3 months tenure to like 6 months tenure, which is very common. Most of them prefer a tenure of 3 to 6 months, which means we're talking about an impact to a market of like 370 trillion, right? So that's the huge size of the market, and this is a very, very hot topic in most of the financial service sector clients and most regulators, who, including RBI. This is one of the big transition. And why are we talking this now? Because as we speak, these IBORs are getting, whatever we're talking about, LIBOR and EURIBOR will end, and there will be new alternative rates for these particular interbank offer rates, and those alternative reference rates will take over the LIBORs, TIBORs, and EURIBORs. So therefore, there's also a statement that LIBOR sunset has arrived in 2021. January 2021 is a timeline set. It's not far to go. We're just talking about like 2 months from now, because just a month more and 2020 ends. And from the beginning of 2021, uh, there will not be rates available in LIBOR, right? So there will be an alternative to LIBOR, and people have to switch to LIBOR. So now, therefore, how does it matter to us? Let's say I have a loan which is LIBOR linked, which is already existing in the balance sheet. Come 2021, I'll have to switch to a new interbank rate, which is an alternative reference rate, and accordingly there will be an accounting implications, because the rate at which I have borrowed right now is going to be different than the rate at which I'll have to now change my provisions to accommodate this transition. It's not that I would want to change my interest percentage, but because of the transition which is happening across the world, I'm forced to change my contract from LIBOR linked rate to another linked rate, which could be Sophia or Sonar or anything for that matter, which will come in short time, right? So any other alternative reference rate. And accordingly, there are accounting implications and there are disclosure implications. There are implications around financial instrument standard if the client is under Ind AS. From an accounting standard per se perspective, if the client is not in Ind AS, still there is an interest change. Therefore, how do I now need to recognize this change in the interest? Should I do prospectively? Should I de-recognize the existing loan? Because my entire exchange is changed. Like, should I de-recognize the loan and then re-recognize again? So these are certain questions that comes in mind. And if we have, let's say, derivatives, which were again linked to LIBOR space, now the derivative has to go to a new market, then there could be some clients who would have done hedge accounting, either applying a guidance note on derivatives issued by ICAI from an accounting standards perspective, or applying Ind AS 109. If they are applying hedge accounting criteria, the hedge designation the hedging effectiveness testing, all of that have happened considering certain interest rates, right? Now that the interest rates are going to change because of change in the entire transition, someone moving from an existing interbank offer rate to an alternative reference rate, how does one then have to look at this entire hedging relationship? Right, what will happen to the existing hedging relationships? Should we need to de-designate, or can we continue to designate it? So all those again are some questions. And these are the things I think and thoughts that I would want to leave it to you, that this topic looks like very fancy and like, global, but it has implications on the financial statements per se, right? Let's say if client has got leases, and maybe if the client is an IND-AS and they've applied a recent standard on leases, and for the purpose of the discount rates, right, incremental borrowing rates that they've used for the purpose of discounting the lease payments, the lease discount rates, assuming they've taken their loan portfolio, which is again linked to a LIBOR, and therefore the discount rate that they've used is again representing the LIBOR markets. Now that they're again changing to a LIBOR, to another set of alternative reference rates, a new set of rates, therefore their leases also have to undergo a change, because the discounting of the cash flows they've done considering a particular rate now might have changed. Now should I then look at initial recognition, subsequent recognition? Is it a change in estimate? Those are again certain questions that comes in mind. So those are, I think, the accounting aspects that we'll have to look at when we consider IBOR transitions. I will just maybe pause here. Mangrish, do you want to add on anything on this slide particularly?
So thanks Asha, for setting. I would only say one aspect, and that is if I were to quote J.C. Vidya, the Bank Governor of Federal Reserve, and he said only two things are certain in life: one is debt and taxes. But then he recorrected himself and he said the third one, which is there, is the exit of LIBOR, and that's December 2021. We are moving out of LIBOR, and that's for certain. So Asha has definitely touched upon this. One thing which I would like to highlight here, though there is an implication of, but there is equal implications on all those corporates who have external commercial borrowings, where all those instruments, financial instruments, which are predominantly linked to LIBOR. And in the Indian context specifically, if one were to look at MIFOR, which is a Mumbai interbank forward rate, as a forward premium which gets calculated by referencing this to US LIBOR. So we have this computation of MIFOR, which is used in many of the trades in interbank market, which is reference to US LIBOR. So definitely there is an implication, because the LIBOR itself is not observable. LIBOR itself will not be after December 2021. So how do you compute, and what is that methodology which has to be used? That would have a huge implication. And from that aspect, if I were to put a number to it, $435 billion is, as per the 2019, is the external commercial borrowings on the size of the corporates, and where India did and has an implications from the derivatives perspective. So that's just a thought. What is the significance of this topic, and why this is very important for us as a chartered accountant community to get very well acquainted as we move forward in 2021. Over to you, Asha. I think we can proceed.
Thank you, Mang. Moving on, in terms of, I think we'll keep this quite simple. As Mangrish rightly said, this will impact huge amount of ECBs and derivative contracts which clients have on their balance sheet portfolios. But I think just to step back before even we think about what is this transition, like as we discussed, maybe if I have to step back and say what really IBOR means. IBOR means very simple. An IBOR transition is moving from an existing LIBOR domain to a new alternative reference rate. So therefore, one immediate question to our mind is, what are these new rates, right? Where is it available? Who is providing it? We'll come to that part. But why, first of all, this change was necessary, right? It was going very well. As I said, somewhere in 1960s is when this entire concept of IBOR got emerged, and JP Morgan, Barclays, a lot of, I think, banks which started participating in the IBOR rate releases. But why they really had to change? What was a big thing which they had to change? Before coming to that, I think the reason why they wanted to change is the mechanism by which the LIBORs were computed, right? So the way I think these rates were computed by these exchanges were, they used to take around 18 banks on a daily basis, maybe by around 11 a.m., send their estimates. Now, note my word, it was an estimate. It wasn't an actual, the rate at which borrow. It was definitely, representing an actual rate, but they sent an estimated rate saying, if I have to borrow, maybe I'll borrow at, some examples which are there, not really from an Indian context, this makes sense, but maybe 2.6, 2.5, 2.7, so on and so percentages is what I think I would borrow if I have to borrow. And these, what this exchange does is, the London Exchange, it takes all of these rates together and takes out the top outliers and bottom outliers and picks the middle one, because the top and the bottoms are actually anomalies, right? It may not represent the real averages. And from a statistical perspective, they pick up like maybe top mid three and if you kind of look at my ignoring top three and bottom three, the rest of the things they will take and they do a simple average of it. And a LIBOR is an average of the rest of the banks. So this was going very smooth. Everything was going pretty good. And this is a rate at which most banks will start offering their portfolios, right? The bank loans, etc. But what was a problem in this entire process was, because the banks were giving these rates on an estimated basis, of course, representing some actual transactions, they still had some subjectivity in it. There was judgment in it. And if you remember 2008, when entire LIBOR crisis happened, the biggest reason for crisis was banks used this judgment very wrongly. They started flooding their P&L account. They started giving the rates at a very, very low cost, just to ensure that a lot of people come and borrow the money, right? Just to increase their loan books, the banks started giving the wrong falsifying data. And then this caused a enormous disturbance, and it became a big crisis in 2008, and everybody started ringing the bell that LIBORs are not working. There's a big scam because banks are not really reflecting the actual rates at which they have to borrow. They're fudging the data. And I think there are a number of fact patterns which I don't want to touch in this group, not too maybe relevant to us, but I was reading about it that a lot of banks had to pay a huge amount of the fine just because they were doing all of this fudging of the data. And then came the authorities said this is not working well, and we need to find an alternative to LIBOR because it's already under radar and people are not really not really thinking that it's transparent, and it's losing its own credibility for whatever the reasons so far has happened. Now, this is where I think every one wanted to have a change in the LIBOR, and this came up somewhere in 2008. Credit crisis was like big alarming point, and after that, many other agencies came to forward and said, let's start using an alternative reference rates, and let's not have LIBOR, Euribor, or for that matter, the Japanese IBOR rate for future transactions. So if I now say, right, this change, it is not something which happened in overnight. It's happened for like 15, 16 years of banks doing this transaction, and last 10 years, because of all the crisis which happened in 2008, huge amount of implications in financial statements on account of that crisis, there was a definite need to have an alternative reference rates. It is must to change, right? So why, therefore, this change came up? Some of the pointers that we have is robustness, lack of robustness, reduced transaction volumes because the trust started coming down. Obviously, the transaction volume started coming down. Because of the judgments, there was a lot of facts were missing, right? Anything which is driven by judgments, the facts of the information is lesser. It's less analytical because it is more driven by the judgments of the banks, and there were benchmarking issues. It was not compliant to IOSCA principles, right? The security commissions were not very happy. The chief executives of FCA announced that we have to end the LIBOR because there's a sustainability issue. There is not, too much of a transparency in the system, and it needs to end. So some of these were the biggest drivers of why LIBOR, for that matter, IBOR, had to change. It's still called as IBOR, by the way. Okay, we're not saying IBOR is changed. What is changed is it's going from one exchange to another exchange. I'm moving from an existing way of computing an IBOR rate to a new way of computing an IBOR rate. Wherever there were existing exchanges which were giving these rates, now we'll move to a new alternative reference rates provided by new exchanges. So this is predominantly what IBOR transition all means. Anything else, Mangarish? I think you're very close to Indian context, so I'll just pause here. Maybe sometimes you want to add on anything.
Yeah, so thanks, Asha. So from the this genesis, right? So 2008 crisis, the banks were not submitting the by submission by the high street 80 banks. If I were to not provide the submission correctly, then the overall average undergoes a change, and which actually also means that the monetary transmission doesn't happen, which is what the basic cardinal principle. So whenever we are doing a banking, right, so there has to be a monetary transmission in the economy. So that was something which was missing in the case of LIBOR, because one, it was an estimate provided by the banks. Secondly, there was lack of transparency. Thirdly, there was liability because banks were trying to safeguard their own interest because they were not they wanted to give to the wider market that they have supposed to pay a higher rate of interest. That means there is something wrong with the bank, right? So, for example, an ex bank will have to pay a higher rate in the interbank market. That clearly means that there is some liquidity concern with the bank, hence it has to pay a higher rate. So they never submitted the higher rates in terms of those estimates, which is ultimately resulted into a lower benchmark in the form of LIBOR. And everybody was actually concerned that there is a credit crisis here. The rates should actually increase, but the rates are not increasing. What is it that is happening here? It cannot be that rates are not increasing. It's very counterintuitive, right? So when it was decided, as Asha rightly pointed out, it was more a matter of conduct. And then if you say Financial Conduct Authority, which is a regulator in UK, it has taken a very strong view on this matter. And then it was decided that the Intercontinental Exchange, which is the agency which is supposed to derive this benchmark by combining all these rates from the 18 bank submission and excluding the outliers, they need to move to an alternate reference rate, which takes into principle the International Security Organization's principles into consideration, and more so in terms of reliability, more so in terms of transparency, which is a very important consideration, and it just gives you a clear indication that whatever is being done are done at a real rate. And that is where the whole idea of moving to alternate reference rate. In the same context, RBI, when they give a thought to this, if you see in September of 2019, RBI came out with a circular which clearly said that the banks are now supposed to use the external benchmark rate, which is Benchmarks India Private Limited, which has been set up to clearly compute those rates which are to be used as we move forward. So that's a precursor to moving from the fixed rates to all reference rates, which are externally reference rates. So in the circular stated that banks are advised to use the external benchmarks in the form of repo rates. So if you see most of their lending in terms of home loans or be it on MSME loans, so some products, some portfolios from the banking perspective, they have taken the repo rate as one of the rate. And of course, then there is a credit spread which gets added. There also gets the cost of funding which gets added. But a base rate is now moved to the external reference rate. So that's a precursor. The slide which is depicted here is basically says that, as we said, the LIBOR was one of the IBORs of many other IBORs, right? So various jurisdiction, various currencies, and LIBOR also got published into 5 currencies, right? So with seven tenures. So there was a 1 month and a 3 month, right? And the contracts which were actually linked ran from say few days to more than 30 years. So it was a very critical aspect as to what and how do you move from LIBOR or a IBOR to an alternate reference rate, and how will we do it in a manner which actually does not impact economic value, because that's very important, right? The value transfer should not happen. So when you're making a change, the financial contracts are already entered into by reference. If you're making a change which is a knee-jerk reaction, it will result into some loss to the value that should not occur. Various authorities across the globe, like for example in United States we have Federal Reserve, Office of Comptroller of Currency, right? So and in UK we have the Prudential Conduct Authority, PCA. We have a financial regulator in terms of FRA and the Bank of England. They all put together a mechanism as to how do we transition from LIBOR to an alternate reference rate? So the chart which is depicted here clearly gives you, and from each jurisdiction in a currency, for example, if a GBP LIBOR, how do you determine a reference rate or a risk-free rates, which are the reference rates? Now, one peculiar feature, if you see RFR, RFR stands for risk-free rate. And if you see on the slide, we have the Reform Sterling Overnight Indexed Average. Now, this is SONIA. So if GBP LIBOR is moving to SONIA, similarly, USD LIBOR is moving to SOFR, similarly, Euribor is moving to Ester, and we have Swiss francs, then moving to Swiss overnight average, SARON, and you have the JPY, which is to Tonya, so Tokyo overnight index average. Now, what is it that is very peculiar in this case? If you see on the rate type, wherever it is secured, right? So wherever it is secured, how do you take that into consideration? The secure rates will be always lower than the rates which are not secured. So if you're taking something which is secured, then you have to be all the more certain you translate, which can actually be a representative rate. So that's where Asha was referring to, that there is a particular set of people, set of activities from the statistics or quantitative statistics perspective, where the people will have to engage them to determine the pricing model, because the pricing has to be done. One important feature is that in this case, LIBOR had a term. So we had LIBOR for 3 months, we had LIBOR for 6 months, we have LIBOR for a year. But in this case, if the reference rates are to be considered, most of them are overnight. So if you are saying the Reform Sterling Overnight Indexed Average, then that it lacks term. And if it doesn't have the term, then we'll have to build a term structure in that. And we have to build a term structure in that. We'll also have to build some amount of credit spread. So from secured, we'll have to take it to a level where it is more representative from the people's perspective, where you can link them. So if you see, for example, GBP LIBOR, we have to understand as to how it will get derived. So we'll have to take, which are all transactions which have happened for last 5 days, right? So historically, it will take into consideration whatever transactions which have happened, and actually you have to compute that rate. So now what happens is that in this case, it is actually more representative of the transactions which are happening in the economy. It does not actually mean that you are doing a submission based on some estimate or some guidance. So that is where the whole idea came through, and that is where we can see that all these reference rate, and if you see some of the high street banks like the Goldman Sachs or for that matter HSBC, they've already started referencing all their transactions now to these alternate reference rate. They've started, the journey has started. The volumes have not picked up. They will definitely pick up, because basis the directives from global regulators, December 2021 is the sunset for LIBOR. So if December 2021 is the sunset for LIBOR, as we approach December 2021, you will see more and more people moving to alternate reference rate, and the volumes of LIBOR started dwindling or they get reducing. If the volumes get reducing, then it cannot be actually also inferred as a representative rate in the market. So that is also a very important consideration one will have to look at. If the volumes themselves come down by next year, then definitely LIBOR is not a representative benchmark any which ways. So this is where, if you see each of the banks, they have created a LIBOR transition page, and they will mention all these rates as to how they trying to have the new products mapped or built on the alternate reference rate, and what is the framework for transitioning from LIBOR-based contracts to the alternate reference rate. The slide clearly mentions as to each of these GBP LIBOR, USD LIBOR, which is the agency or the rate administrator. And most of it, if you see, are the central banks of those respective jurisdictions, the Federal Reserve in US or Bank of England in UK. So most of them are in central bank, but that was not the case earlier, right? Earlier, it was the Intercontinental Exchange, which is actually a third body which was administrating or rather computing the LIBOR. So these things have definitely changed. We are moving to a more realistic rate, the rate which actually will give you the transmission. So whatever actions the central bank take from the economic perspective will get translated to these rates in the form of RFRs, and you will add the credit spreads to it. And once you have the credit spread and the term structure, in subsequent slide we have how the term structure has to be created. But once those term structure is added, that is a rate which will get as a reference rate in all your contracts. I would be
Thanks,
happy.
Mangrish.
Yeah. Can you just move to the next slide? Thank you.
Sure, Mangrish. Just before we move to the next slide, one important thing which I think Mangrish was talking about, we have to note here is. So Mangrish, maybe you have to go on a mute, I guess, once it's echoing. Yeah, this is helpful. Perfect. So one other thing which we need to be careful, like why this really matters to us, right? And again, coming back to our topic line of why do we need to consider whatever Mangrish spoke about is extremely technical aspects of how banks will compute it, and which itself is a big subject matter expertise by to be achieved by anybody else. But for us, like some of the chartered accountants who are dealing with the clients, what's a clear message to them? The clear message to them is, if we have like any portfolios which are now, let's say, GBP LIBOR linked, the question that we are asking them is that, okay, which means have you had a discussion that what will happen when this GBP LIBOR rate is getting changed to SONIA? Because we know that this is the alternative rates for each of these IBORs, right? As I think, to reiterate, GBP LIBOR will go to SONIA, USD LIBOR will have to shift to SOFR, Euribor, Euro LIBOR has to shift to Aster, and CHF LIBOR has to shift to Ceron, and so on and so forth. Like, is our clients ready and having those discussions at the right point of time, having those negotiations at the right point of time? Is there contracts which are right now linked to LIBOR, maybe GBP LIBOR? They should ideally have a fallback language. What is fallback language? Is like, okay, if when GBP LIBOR ends, like if we have to go to SONIA, what is the terms at which this particular moment will happen? There is a fallback language which enables you to move from LIBOR to SONIA, but not very sure how many of the Indian context clients have thought about it, and whether there is a language which is already inserted. Maybe Mangrish, you can talk about it in subsequent slides, but that's what our clients have to be very careful about. It's just not about accounting, it is also about legal, right? From legality perspective, is their contracts complete? It allows them to do so, right? From the I think from the taxation perspective, how does this entire thing work? Because what they've offered for, let's say, if somebody has a carry forward of losses considering an interest income at or expense at a particular rate, which is what considered for the purpose of their profitability, etc., then how is that now going to change? Because I'm looking at future cash flows. Let's say I've taken impairment guidance. I'm just giving some examples where I determine the cash flows basis certain particular methodology. Now my cash flows will change because my debt at which I've borrowed, a coupon will change, right? So now my cash flows, I've used debt as a parameter, or I've used debt capital as the KPI. Like, am I thinking about all of those, and do I know that what is going to be an impact? So that should be our question to clients, that we don't have an answer. To be honest, I don't have an answer. I'm not expert in this area, but have they reached out to people who understand the pricing game and understand there's no value transfer, or understand that some rates, looks very less right now, but at some point of time one has to equate, right? There shouldn't be a value transfer. What is value transfer here? Let's say I have a rate at, like, now, let's say for example 5%, but when I move to SONIA, now I'm getting at 3.5%. Then it means to say it creates a lot of disturbance. How can I immediately have a rate which is lesser than what I had earlier, right? Does this mean to say banks will suffer? Because bank would have estimated their income basis a particular rate which is linked to a LIBOR. This reduction was never expected earlier. So now, therefore, can we now have such a big value transfer to customers because of this rate? Like, as Mangrish rightly mentioned, most of these rates, the new alternative rates, are risk-free rates, right? Of course, there has to be an adjustment made to this risk-free rate to ensure that we're not transferring too much of a value and it's not disturbance in the financial service sector. Right, so this is an important slide that we all should know in terms of what exactly is LIBOR transition means. Like, if I have to now, if someone asks us that what is LIBOR transition, simple, moving from LIBOR to an alternative rate, which is where you see this red box here. These are going to be the future alternative reference rates, which are based on the risk-free rate, adding on some kind of a spread to ensure there's no value transfer that happens. And I'm just going to the next slide, which is what Mangrish was mentioning, that how this entire LIBOR versus alternative reference rate comparison happens. If you kind of look at right now, Sonia as a spread, like as a rate, if you kind of look at the way the chart is going on, the LIBOR, the current LIBOR is comparatively on the higher side, but obvious because it is judgmental rate. It has some adjustments made to it, and it has, of course, a credit risk added to it. But if you look at, I think, Sonia, it is actually the gray line that you see. Sonia is slightly lower than the LIBOR rate. Now, what we're talking about is how do we make these adjustments, right? How do we make an adjustment of a Sonia to represent a right debt or cost of debt for a bank? So similarly, if you kind of look at how this entire, the securitized overnight financing rate has to be computed, if there's no tenor, right, then it's even more a challenge. Like if I know it is 3 months or 6 months, we can actually put our cash flows together and make it work. But if there's no tenor, then what is it I'm really thinking about? This is a global question. We get to hear a lot of answers that there are ways people are doing it. There's some statistical assumptions that the banks are taking into consideration while putting this rate. But eventually, the question here is, how do you take risk-free rate plus some spread, right? That spread has to be computed in a very logical manner, and there is no comprehensive mechanism to compute that spread. If I have to call that spread as an X factor, that X factor is becoming a biggest challenge right now. Mangrish, anything you wanted to say here?
No, I think, yeah. So you have already covered. So basic aspect here is that how would you determine the risk component? So credit risk component becomes a very important consideration because these are risk-free rates. You will have the term structure, and for that term structure, maybe the calculations will reach of taking the medians or the averages. So what period our averages you can take into consideration so that you build structure to it from the risk-free rate. I move it. So for example, if I'm saying that a LIBOR plus 100 basis points is my rate of interest, now in the alternate reference rate regime, I may have to take it alternate reference rate plus 120 basis points. This 20 basis point difference is essentially to adjust the credit risk factors and the term structure which you want to put here. So that is where the importance would be, because of course this is more on the technical side, but if you see what is it trying to achieve, it is trying to achieve that the contract which I had on the LIBOR plus 100 basis point, the value of that contract gets preserved even if I move from that to an alternate reference base to 120 basis points. So economically equivalent value has to be preserved. An economically equivalent contract will satisfy this contract, and Asha would also run you through while we move to the IASB principles as to what the contracts are, that over there also this principle of economically equivalent is a very, very important consideration. The slide which is appearing here in this chart, where you can see that there is a 3-month LIBOR plus margin, right? So January 1, if you are saying there is a 3-month LIBOR plus margin, on a coupon date, coupon is when the payment will actually happen on that instrument. What are we doing? On 31st March, we are doing a computation of that amount basis the LIBOR on that coupon date. Cut this situation from the perspective of on the alternate reference rate ARR. What will happen is that the same example, if I was taking the LIBOR plus 100 basis point, moving from that to alternate reference rate plus 120 points, what will happen is that my LIBOR was quarterly. So from the compounding perspective, it was done quarterly compounding, and then there is a settlement which is happening quarterly. Alternate reference rate is overnight index rate, right? So if you are saying that alternate index rate is an overnight index rate, there could be a daily compounding of interest. We all understand compounding of interest, right? So if it is daily compounding, which is happening on the alternate interest rate, that is something which we will have to derive as to that will then result into economically equivalent value. So the LIBOR, which is compounding quarterly and making a payment at the end of the quarter, versus the alternate reference rate, which is compounding daily in arrears and then making a payment maybe on the monthly basis. What is it that the equivalent economic value we will have to determine? So one of the methodologies which is depicted on this slide, if you see that says that for derivatives, so two aspects here. One, the transactions which will get impacted because of the LIBOR change. One would be the cash transactions, right? All our loans, be it on the corporate side or be it on the bank side or the NBFC side for that matter. All those loans or the instruments which are cash instruments will get impacted, which are reference to LIBOR, and all the derivatives contract which are reference to LIBOR. So for as far as derivatives is concerned, so this organization which all would have heard, or at least if you refer to a derivative contract, generally it says that ISDA protocols for all the derivative documentation, which is the International Swaps and Derivatives Association, they have provided a framework as to how do you compute the price from the alternate reference rate perspective. So they suggested that you may take a 5-year median from the price variation perspective to build that component of term structure so that ultimately you derive a value. So to keep it very simple, to the example which you spoke about, the LIBOR plus 100 basis point, from that moving to alternate reference rate to 120 basis point, at 120 basis point, how do you derive that value? That is something, if you're doing for the derivative contract, it says that a 5-year median average can be taken into consideration. The whole objective of this entire exercise is to ensure that there is no loss economically to the transaction, because if that happens, because the rules of the games are already decided, right? Everybody referenced it to LIBOR. Nobody was told that, or nobody was certain that this will get transitioned out in December of 2021. So everybody is already referenced it to LIBOR. So we have trillions and trillions dollars of derivative contracts with reference to LIBOR. And if you're moving it from LIBOR to alternate reference rate, the mechanism to ensure that there is no loss to value. It has to be economically equivalent. If it is not happening that way, then there are certain challenges. Secondly, it is important because practical experience which are provided by the accounting standard setters and from the accounting income perspective. So if we do not define this economically equivalent as one of the parameters, then there is quite likely that these transactions may fail certain of the accounting nuance, accounting parameters, which we'll discuss, and Asha will also throw light on that when we move to the next slide. Some of the accounting aspects will also become very critical. So LIBOR has an implication not just from the finance or from that perspective, from the banks or a corporate. It touches not just your treasury, it touches the accounting, it touches the operation. It also has an impact on your leases in terms of incremental borrowing rate, which you compute, right, for your RAU determination. So the point here is that the rate determination from LIBOR to ARR would not be a very straightforward exercise. There are judgments, there are assumptions, there are inputs which will go into it. One thing is very certain, that whatever happens, you need to preserve the value, and economically equivalent value has to be derived with whatever mechanism you use. Asha,
Absolutely. Yeah. I will just touch upon this. Yeah, just I think the interest of the time that we have, not to get into Mangesh, sorry, but you have to mute.
No.
Yeah, I think it's just echoing, I guess, because both of us are on unmute maybe. All right. So what we're talking, I think what Mangesh rightly said here is the slide here, right? So what if you kind of look at it, I don't want to get into too much of technicalities about pricing, but if you see, for example, a LIBOR versus SOFR, right? If you look at over the period of the tenure, the rates will still be on an average will be the same, right? So this is exactly what X factor we're talking about. We don't want to create a value in such a way that, okay, now if I move to a new alternative rate, everything will be beneficial to a client or a customer, and thereby the complete value gets transferred. And that's the point he's making, that then it's not economically equivalent. How do I now create a value which is economically equivalent, which matches my earlier transaction to this transactions, but it is more robust, more clear, right? More transaction driven, and I think more historical looking, not really too many assumptions, not too many judgments, but I still have to compute X factor which has certain complications around it, assumptions around it, but it's more driven by data. It's not driven by feelings and emotions. That's exactly what they're keeping it in this particular mechanism. It should be a fair game. It shouldn't happen that the minute one moved to LIBOR to an SOFR, everybody will jump and say, okay, want only SOFR rates. I don't want, I just want to immediately change it. So that kind of for immediate recontract, yeah, finding X, the pre-session or a recontracting adjustment that one has to make it, this becomes important, but not really for us as chartered accountants, but this is one of the biggest pain point. But where is this important? You can now understand, okay, if you've taken, let's say 5.20% or as a rate for the purpose of discounting your cash flows for wherever you've given your cash flow discounting, now if that is becoming, let's say 5.05, like 5.05%, then you will have to now look at, okay, I'll have to change my computations across, right? So that's where accountants have to be conscious about. I'll quickly touch upon the timelines. I think it's not too relevant, but it is definitely relevant to know that it's not too far away. Right? That's exactly why we're taking this topic at a right point of time to create an awareness that there are certain products which have already got transitioned, right? And there are certain products which will be transitioned, but by the end of 2021, which is just like in a year to go from now, most of the products actually in fact, I think there's a clear, bold statement that the LIBOR will actually end and the transactions will significantly decrease. So from that perspective, what is globally the timelines are like by the end of Q3 2020, which I think we're already there, right? So which is already over. I think the lenders should be able to offer non-LIBOR products, and which is already happening. We're already seeing transactions which are coming up in the new alternative reference rate exchanges. They're saying after the end of Q3 2020, any new GBP LIBOR loan, which includes switch mechanism to SONIA or alternatives by end 2021, it has to be mandated to provide the switch mechanism. I think now it is must to provide because we've already crossed this timelines. And Q1 2021, there won't be any LIBOR loans. Everything would be linked to the new alternative exchanges, which is what you saw in the red box that we spoke about. So this is more timelines. If you kind of look at product-wise, floating rate notes is already moved. June 2020, the transaction volume is already shifted. Business loans is September 2020, consumer loans is September 2020, securitization is December 2020. More or less, I think if you look at the way the ARRC is recommending the timelines, it looks very likely that all of these corporations and clients who have earlier LIBOR linked transactions will have to start thinking about how to transition. I'll not really touch upon the spread adjustment. We kind of spoke about it in brief when we spoke about derivatives, but I'll quickly move about what are the risks and challenges, and maybe we'll keep it short and spend some more time as we move further on exactly what is the accounting guidance and what is RBI guidance. Mangesh, I'll leave this section to you.
Yeah. So as we were discussing, so right, LIBOR alternate reference rate. So what is it that is more impacting for us, everybody, chartered accountants as well as the businesses and the banks together? The readiness of the market, which is very important. Even if you're saying that we are moving to alternate reference rate, it's not an easy job at this point in time. All those contracts which are linked to LIBOR, they need to be repapered. So we need to understand as to what is the fallback language which is inserted there. Fallback language, when we say, like for example, if there is a public holiday and if I don't have a reference rate, which rate do I opt? Because the rate is not published. If there is no rate published, then what is the methodology I need to follow? Do I take a nearest rate? Should I add some to the rate which is their observed rate? What is it that I need to do? So that's where the market readiness is very important. Regulator, be it RBI, be it global regulators like Federal Reserve, they are actually monitoring this entire situation as to how these things will happen. Because whenever there is a change, right? So whenever there is a change, the point comes in that one is the actual change and one there is either the consequential damage which can happen to the economy, that is very important. And the market readiness will also be tested at those times because the time period is very short. December 2021 is just 1 year ahead. So that is very, very important that different currencies which were pegged to LIBOR, if you're making it to alternate references, is the market ready in terms of the technology to compute those pricings, ready in terms of the business, right? So all those the merchant bankers or all those bank relationship managers who were talking to the external clients, like with you and me and the corporates? Do they understand what is changing and why it is changing, how it is changing, and how it will impact the customer, and whether you will be able to sustain your market share? Very important. Funding costs. Now, this is very specific and it's very technical, but I'll not go into the detail of it. But there is something called a funds transfer pricing. As a bank, and you are taking funds from the depositors and you are then lending it to loans, or you are investing in investments, right? So there's a cost attached to it. So when there is a cost attached to it, whether that rate, which is the funds transfer rate, so each area of the bank has a different funds transfer rate. So will that rate undergo a change? Because that rate determines the profitability of the particular division, and then of course the overall bank. So will that get impacted? How will that get impacted? All those calculations will have to be done. Financial risk, basis risk, which you already discussed, right? Because we are moving from a LIBOR to an ARR, the referencing itself is changing. So there is a basis risk, because one was, say, LIBOR plus 100 basis points, other was ARR plus 120 basis points. So then there is definitely an implication on the basis risk. Capital adequacy from the bank's perspective, it is more from the bank's perspective, because it will have implications on capital if the rate is changing, and if, as we spoke, the funding risk rate is going to undergo change, then it can have implications on the capital. So capital is very important for a bank. If I'm lending something, then I'm not able to further lend it. And if because of this change, there is some reduction in the RWA, there's something called RWA there on the slide, on the financial thing, we call it a risk weight asset. So every time you lend, you have a risk weight attached to that lending, and it has the capacity to eat your capital as a lending institution. So because of this change, because of the change in the LIBOR linked products, what is it that will impact the capital adequacy from the bank's perspective? From the operational perspective, the infrastructure changes, the systems are all geared, as Asha spoke, for ages we are using LIBOR. So all the systems are fully geared to compute only the LIBOR contracts. You will have to make those changes to the master model, do the testing. Client communication and outreach is very important. If you see in the global context, the Financial Conduct Authority, it clearly mentions that the conduct risk is the most important risk in case of the LIBOR transaction. What is the conduct risk? How you demonstrate and clearly announce it to the clients. How do you take it to the clients? This change is happening, and because of this change, what are the implications on your income stream? What are the implications on your existing derivative contracts? Or what are the implications on your relationship with your bankers? So that is very important. You need to be more transparent while this change is happening, so that there is no issues around the communication. And that is where the conduct risk becomes very important. The communication with the client, the reputation is very important in this case. As a bank, or as a lending institution, your reputation is important. And as a country also, your reputation is very important if you're not able to transition to an alternate reference rate regime, and then there is a risk around it. And litigation, because all these contracts are derivative contracts. You know, your customers have had an OTC contract, like over-the-counter derivatives with the banks. And if tomorrow the banks were to change it to ARR, of course, if the liability changes from me as a corporate, it has a severe implications. I may land up into the court of law. I may go. So there could be more litigations coming out of it. So as Asha was trying to maintain the fallback language, the drafting or the papering would be very important from all these aspects.
One point, Manglish, I think I wanted to add here is also that when you speak to your clients, just make it a point to ensure that you're communicating to your clients to be aware about this IBOR as a concept. So that what it should not happen is that they fall back to whatever the banks are saying and making the contracts in like the bank's language. So it's always helpful for the client to know the background of what is happening so that they make a right contract. To add. Manglish, you're on mute. Sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was just trying
This is
to
one
just
thing in the virtual world we are not able to correct it, right? This mute and unmute, this doesn't get synchronized.
yeah, because we still in the classroom mode most of the time. So thanks for that, Asha. I was just referring that what Asha was trying to mention exactly is on the slide. The conduct risk in the terms of customers' needs or the interest is very paramount from the lending institution, and similarly, customer themselves, we should be aware of their rights and they need to be mindful of the fact that this is changing. I'm not saying that there will always be manipulation, but they need to be mindful of the fact that so that they are more open to have a conversation with the bankers. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. If you look at different teams at which this different conduct risk can happen, right? Now, what is conduct risk is how you position yourself, right? In like as a bank, how do you communicate? Like, is your communication is giving right messaging? Is your contract terms are representing right way of doing things, right? Are you ensuring that there's no conflict of interest when you're bringing your processes up to speed? You're ensuring that market conduct is maintained. Now, it is very important that okay, you show the way you want to show, but how are you perceived? Like how the clients are benchmarking you, right? So there are quite a few things which I guess the financial institutions are going through now because of this huge transition. Like, okay, I know the transition is happening, but how do I manage the communication part of it, investor relation perspective, customer relation perspective, right? How does the media look at me? Right, how does each of my contract terms will be considered? Like, will it be reliable? Will people consider it to be transparent? I think these are the things which most of the organizations are right now dealing with. I think if you look at it, I think this is a most important slide for all of us to say. We just spoke about what are the different, but from an Indian context, what exactly RBI is doing right now. So let's just hear some facts about what's happening in India, specifically from MyFor.
Yeah. So as you can see on the slide, so of course, from the India perspective, we started slightly better than compared to what the global regulators were doing, and simply because we had our own priorities. Have started this journey way back spoke 2019 when they said that the banks as such need to reference it to the external benchmark, because you all know, right? So bank always had this lending to a marginal rate of lending, MCLR based lending or prime rates or base rates, right? All these rates were used, which were in-house, which was based on the cost of funding for the bank. So the first time when you are referencing it to the external rate or the benchmark rate in the form of a repo rate, which is the most available rate in the market, widely observable rate in the market, that was taken into consideration. So from this perspective, then it was upon Indian Banks Association to form a working group. So Indian Bank Association formed a working group which comprises of the likes of all the corporates, the banks, all the top tier banks from the public sector, from the private sector, who are representative, who have derivatives and who have all those LIBOR related liabilities and assets on their balance sheet to form part of the working group. A working group basically was having a mandate as to how the transition will happen from the Indian economy perspective, not just from the bank perspective, but also from the corporate perspective. Several meetings of the working group have happened so far. They're trying to devise a mechanism, and of course, they are referring back to the alternate reference rate committee in the United States, or what measures have been taken by the regulators in UK from that perspective, because those learnings are very important from our perspective also, because they've been in the journey just before we started. So we are using that, and in terms of that, how the transition management will happen in the Indian context, what rates are getting impacted. So if you see, normally MyFor is the Mumbai Interbank Forward Rate. It's reference from USD LIBOR. So calculation of forward premium, or the forward premium as we call it regularly, right? So that gets computed by referring to USD LIBOR rate. So if USD LIBOR rate is going to get changed, what is it that the computation of MyFor will look like? What rates and methodology has to be used? That is something which is now being devised at this point in time. We have not reached the conclusion as to what that rate would be. Of course, the deliberations are happening, and also the deliberations are happening in terms of what the impact would it be. Because as we spoke, the cardinal is economic equivalence which has to be maintained, and that has to be looked into as to how that rate will actually result into the value not being actually transferred, or rather how you ensure that a value transfer and there's no loss to value. That's very important. Market outreach, as we were speaking from the market participants perspective, is something also being developed, similar to what has been done by the Prudential Regulatory Authority in UK. So what PRA did was they sent letters to all the CEOs, clearly stating that, dear CEOs, what has been your preparedness on the IBOR transition as far as your lending institution is concerned. Similarly, IBI also, in the context of Reserve Bank of India, in August 2020, they have designed a clearly all these scheduled commercial bank, asking them to provide as to what are their preparedness in terms of LIBOR transition. We have ourselves been involved with a couple of banks in India on their journey of how they are moving from the LIBOR. And this is more pronounced in case of all those banks who have international subsidiaries or international branch operations. And this group, basically, the working group, it will devise the methodologies in terms of for each of the cash market segment that we spoke about, all those loans, all those investments, and all the derivative segments, what methodologies generally would be prepared. Of course, they will not prescribe rules, certainly not, but they will give you the guiding principle as to how you need to do the transition, and while you do the transition, what are the disclosures to make. Because you will have to clearly give in the transition as to the assets and liabilities which are impacted on your balance sheet because of this change, and how you're trying to progress with this transition, and at what time frame you'll be able to conclude that. All those things will be very important. Adjustment to the MIFOR is a very, very important consideration. There are certain methodologies in line with the ISDA protocol, as we were discussing. Similar methodologies have been thought of at the IBS discussion forum. Similarly, from the mean perspective, very technical aspect at this point in time, but the point I want to make here is that the decision has been made in terms of making those changes as an adjustment to MIFOR, because after 2021, the USD LIBOR is not available. So if we are referencing it to USD LIBOR, what is it that we need to change from the spread perspective to make it more relevant to the market, and market still continues to reference it to the LIBOR, to the rate, and which is the MIFOR rate. Asha, you would like to add something here?
I think I'm good. Can you hear me?
I can hear.
Yes, no, I'm good about this. I think Indian context is slightly more trickier. The reason mainly because the preparedness is at a very baby step stage right now, right? We're talking about this entire transition from 2008, when the entire alarms were raised that, okay, LIBOR has to change and everything. We started into the journey quite, I wouldn't say late, but it's slightly at a different time frame. IASB has given the guidance note, FASB has given the guidance notes. There are exposure drafts which are rolling out, I think, but we have our exposure drafts coming out right now. So I think it takes a while for us to know this, but the accounting consequences, we will have good precedences also. In a way to look at it is, most of the global companies are already giving good disclosures around subsequent events, right? Disclosures around what could happen to their portfolios, like recent regulatory updates. When they're bringing those disclosures, they have a good precedence already in terms of what others are doing globally. But having said that, accounting wise and financial reporting wise, we still have to mature a lot from Indian context. There's just a lot to do. I still remember MIFOR is one rate. You know, when we all spoke about this forward premium, I always add a phobia to this, right? Like, how does this gets computed? It's always, you know, something which is subjective, and we never understood this. Now, so it took us ages to crack that, okay, this is how forward premium works, and our clients are now cracking it. Okay, they are dealing with the banks, they've understood a particular mechanism. Now to re-understand and like relearn the mechanism and learn the new mechanism, know how that spread works, right? How does forward premium works? I think that's going to take a slightly longer time, and therefore this awareness is very important amongst the clients, that though it looks niche, but if it is impacting your balance sheet, just get ready, know how much it will impact you. That's what I would want to add.
I just add here in the context, of course, not in the context of LIBOR, but I believe as far as the IFRS 9 was concerned, and we all know Ind AS 109, India was one of the countries which was it was the early adopters of IFRS 9. Only Australia was being the country which all adopted IFRS 9. So world after us, and Europe adopted it after us in 2018. So I think that was a proud moment for us. And I always think that from LIBOR perspective also, we should have good amount of advantage in terms of in the implementation, so that there is a reference point from the India perspective that India also contributes to the world as to how this implementation is happening.
I totally agree. Totally agree. IFRS 9 is a big threat for us. Even today, when I kind of look at IAS 39, I keep thinking, why is there IAS 39 still? And then I realize that, okay, being in India, IAS 109 we implemented starting 2016-17 itself, and rest of the world is still in IAS 39. Like there are a lot of insurance clients who are still in IAS 39. They're like part and parcels of IAS 39 is applicable, but it's definitely I think a phase for India, and I'm sure with the amazing experience that we carry in adopting financial instruments, I guess we can add a lot of contribution from an accounting and reporting side. So I agree with that. Manoj, you want to touch upon this contract remediation bit? I guess we have half an hour. We'll keep it 10 minutes for it, and then
Yeah, I will quickly run through contract remediation because the most important aspect is the accounting, and I think we should do a justice of at least spending 20 minutes here. So from the cost of remediation, so cost of remediation basically on the contract remediation, right? So we need to understand that the entire contract will undergo a change. So we'll have to do an analysis of the contract as to what is changing, what are the fallback clauses, where are the terms, so what terms are there, so we'll have to extract. So entire contracts which are there, maybe voluminous contracts, we have to analyze. We need to use some digital techniques, maybe some OCR techniques to extract that information in terms of what is it that in the contract from that perspective. So that is where the entire contract, and we spoke in the previous slide as well, there is an increased conduct risk, increased risk in identifying what is the dependency, right? So we'll have to proactively identify and manage those dependencies, reduce the entire noise in the market, right? Because we will have to understand what are the nuances of this product, what changes will have to be done. So operational risk, we'll have to be containing that operational risk. Control risk will be also a very important consideration while this contract remediation entire exercise happens. We are changing the contract, but not all the stipulations, but only those relevant stipulations which refer back to LIBOR and the computation of payoff on that contract. So it's very important that you are able to segregate, and in the contracts there could be n number of, say, 400, 500 pages contract, there could be n number of clauses and stipulations. Exactly this LIBOR aspect is embedded, you'll have to identify and isolate it and then see how we replace it with the new language, new reference rate. So this all we need to late mobilization. If you start late, because December 2021 is non-negotiable, right? If you start late, this entire contract remediation will increase your cost in terms of more manpower, more errors, more risk, more customer dissatisfaction. That will all add to it if you don't start early. And that's where the point, and that's where I think we also thought that let's have this session so that a wider community gets educated on this aspect, and definitely they take it to the wider population. I've already touched upon this. So what are the stages in the transition? The stages in the transition is basically where you take those contracts, analyze those contracts, identify the language which needs to be changed, extract, review, publish. Repapering is the word which is generally used. Repapering is generally replacing the language with the new language which is for the alternate reference rate. How will you do it into consideration? And there are legal aspects to it, right? If you change, because LIBOR was on the payment clause, and if you're changing something on the payment side and God forbid it doesn't go well, then you land up in the attorney's office, you are land up in the court of law. So it's very important that what are we changing and how it will impact on the overall operationalization of this contract. That becomes very important. So from the why fallback language, we've already referred to. Why fallback language is because 2021 and beyond, there is no LIBOR. So if there is no LIBOR, then what is it that a rate needs to be referred to? Because positioned or never ever drafted with this total view that you will not have LIBOR, right? Nobody thought that LIBOR will not be in existence. And if LIBOR was not in existence, there was no language to fall back. So to what rate and trigger? So you need to understand the trigger. So triggers could be, for example, if you do not have the representative LIBOR, as I was speaking, come the last quarter of 2021, there may not be a representative market for LIBOR perspective, may not have the published LIBOR in certain currencies, or even if it is published, not many contracts are happening there. So then it is not representative. Then you need to trigger immediately in your contract. And in such cases, for next 5 days, the rate is not moving or no, the trading in the rate is not being published, then you'll have to move to alternate reference rate. And if you move to alternate reference rates, what is it that you would do in terms of adding the spread adjustment, which is very important, right? Spread adjustment, what percentage of spread adjustment you will add? Because your LIBOR was the term-based rate. It was not a secured rate. Now we are referring to alternate reference rate, which are secured rates, which may not have a term built into it. If there is no term built into it, what is that adjustment? You need to account for it, whether it is positive, negative, zero, or no change. That language will be clearly identified as a part of your documentation in the same contract in which the LIBOR was referenced.
I think these are some of the key things which will come in the fallback language altogether. Like what exactly you think you need to do when sorry. So when the contract is being negotiated by the bank, right? So keep this in mind that from a client conversation perspective, what are all the key clauses that has to be repapered? So Mangri spoke about repapering, contract remediation, fallback language. So what we're talking about is what are those key things in the loan agreements that all our clients carry that we have to keep in mind that, okay, what, these are the things that undergo a change, and are we aware about this? Like, for example, do we know the maturity date? Is the maturity date is mentioned in the contract? And now, post this IBOR transition, are we kind of referring that post 2021, how does my contract should read like, right? What should I do as per the maturity date perspective? What is the benchmark which is being used, right? So am I using a right benchmark going forward, considering the alternative reference rates, right? Or what are the amendment provisions? And there are legal aspects to it. Is your lawyer understands that some change done by the bankers as a whole in their overall contract repapering perspective, are you okay? Now, the point is, most of the times there are standard contracts and some of our clients just takes the contract. Like, I mean, if you kind of remember, during COVID also we spoke about this, there was no force majeure clause in many of the contracts by clients, and it ended up with a big legal hassle for people. It ended up with dispute because I am telling the landlord that I will not pay because act of God, I'm suffering. But the landlord says, show me where is it in the contract. The contract doesn't say that you will not pay me when there is a situation like this. And just because we did not really think about and anticipate about a particular thing to happen, the contract was silent. How do you now force things which are beyond the contract, right? So one has to be very clear while repapering the contract. Are you comfortable with the terms and amendments that is made to the contract, right? Line by line and word by word, is your client understands that what is the implications of those changes to their contracts. And as we keep speaking, some of the instruments have already been undergone a change, right? There's already a new referencing which is happening, which means maybe some of your clients have not even reached out to the bankers to ask about, is this change processed? If my instruments are linked to a MIFOR and MIFOR is linked to a USD LIBOR, and if it's already been changed, are you asking these right questions that, okay, because I am a small customer, are you keeping me towards the end and addressing all the big corporates? What is it happening? You have to be conscious about asking right questions. And I think, again, force majeure comes here also. Unforeseen circumstances, how do I fulfill the contractual obligations, right? My interest rate, is this something, which I need to pay or do not pay? All of this I'll have to be clear. What are the document type that we would want to use? And what are the other linking contracts are there for your loan? Some of the times, I think most of you know, when you have a loan, which is a foreign currency loan, you eventually end up taking CCIRS, right? To protect your currency risk and to protect your interest rate risk. And if your loan agreement is linked to a CCIRS agreement and it is talking about, protecting your interest at a particular rate, like making your interest from a floating to a fixed rate and making your loan base, a currency base from a fluctuating currency to a fixed currency. Now that you're changing your loan contract, is your interlinking are also undergoing changes, right? And what is the terms in which these are changing? I think those are the with that, we can move to functional area consideration. I told you as it is, this is not too relevant from a commercial organization's perspective, but more relevant from bank's perspective, right? Because you can imagine for a bank, every department of a bank would be impacted, like starting from legal, right, to ending from investor relations, right, to ending from the governance, the all of those departments will be impacted because the way they're doing things right now is getting changed. But for me, as another side of the bank, if I look at it, maybe I'll have impact on accounting, I'll have impact on taxes. I will have definitely impact on treasury because my treasury is looking at different instruments which are linked to LIBOR, right? I'll have impact. Of course, I'll have impact to some of these aspects, but may not be at a larger extent. I will have impact to risk management, specifically, let's say if, talk about an insurance company. Insurance companies, most asset portfolios are designed to, I mean, all of them actually have got, investments designed in a way to take care of their asset liability match. But let's say some of their instruments are linked to the coupons, which are LIBOR or different IBOR rates, then they'll have to now change their risk management strategy to ensure that they're capturing all of these, right? So it has equal implication, maybe larger for banks, maybe little lesser for corporations and slightly lesser for a mid-sized clients. But if any of your clients who are mid-size are subsidiaries of a holding company, let's say for example, and if holding company has borrowed a loan, foreign currency loan, and passed on that to a subsidiary with an interest rate at which they have borrowed, because 185, 186 does not allow me to give anyways free loans. Now I'll have to again look at it. Okay, I might be thinking I'm very small and ignoring about it, but are we factoring that eventually my holding subsidiary agreement also have to undergo change because the loan is coming from a foreign holding or a holding which is borrowed from LIBOR linked exchanges. So these are some things which commercial organizations have to bear it in. But the key different things, legal, we spoke about contract, repapering, remediation, trade confirmation are big things. From a business side, for a bank specifically, transfer of value, economic equivalence, which Mangrish mentioned about, right? It's very important. Risk management, are you conduct risk that we spoke about? How am I showcasing this entire transition to the world, right? How is everybody perceiving about this transition, right? Discounts, projections, like curve modification, all of that comes under risk management. Treasury and finance perspective, I quickly spoke about ALM. I think Mangrish also touched upon how do now my entire capital adequacy would change because of this change in the transition, right? So that will impact my my entire asset and liability position, right? Basis risk, how do I going to manage this? Economic value of equity. Now, debt and equity always have got a relationship. If my cost of debt is getting changed, what happens to my equity? Because I'll have to look at from a overall cost of capital perspective, a debt capital is also component of it, right? So how does that would change? If I have a secured funding earlier, but then if you look at some of the rates, like if I go back to our slide and maybe I don't want to take so long time, but if I kind of just go back to what we discussed in our most important slide about what is changing. Here, if you look at, right? So though if you look at Sonia is unsecured, but SOFR is secured, right? And then if you see Aster is unsecured and Ceron is secured. So we do not have secured rates everywhere, right? So which means there is still a certain amount of, I think, a risk that I carry in terms of making that secured versus unsecured adjustments. Like, am I considering that while I'm looking at overall risk management angle? I know when Companies Act 2013 was introduced in India, there were many charters which were made. There was a risk management committee, right? There were a lot of documents which were prepared from a risk management angle. So one also have to look at from a holistic perspective, that are you considering the changes required in the respective documents as well. I'm not sure about how Companies Act will react to this. For example, if you look at some of the sections of the Companies Act right now, if I go to 185, 186, etc., they talk about RBI rate and the government yield rate. So not sure if they, considering this change which is happening, do they want to now change it to another rate? I mean, not sure about it, but what is MCA going to react for certain places where the charters were mandatory, risk management aspects were mandatory? So we'll have to keep keep an eye on it, that will there be other consequences on account of IBOR changes. Operations and IT is very important for banks. Most important for them to select a right vendor who understands their system and switches to a new exchange. Accounting, I'll now come to an accounting. A big time impact is there on accounting side. Taxes, there could be some deemed taxable exchanges. There could be book to tax differences. There could be deferred taxes that could arise on account of, the changes of book base versus the tax base of the liability or an asset that we are carrying. Unless the tax understand the transition, even today, it's been so long that we have come to Ind AS. Even today, there is a tax base on account of an Ind AS differences, right? We're still not able to address that completely, right? Even on the math side, we have differences. So it's going to take time from an IBOR perspective as well, that how do we derive tax base. So with that, we'll come to accounting considerations. With all of that we spoke about, if I have to now summarize, IBOR transition, what it is and why it matters. When we come about what it is, we understood that IBOR transition is all about moving from an existing IBORs to a new alternative reference rates, which are more transaction driven, more risk-free rates with spread adjustment. Computation of the spread adjustment requires a lot of technical and statistical inputs to it, right? It has consequences because the guidances are not very matured, right? How to do how do I price all the different types of products which are evolved over the years? That's exactly what IBOR transition means. It will impact, as we discussed in the initial slides, that approximately 370 to 380 trillion transactions are going to be impacted on account of this transition. Now, why it matters? We spoke about it matters from different aspects, from legal aspects, from the taxation perspective, from systems perspective, from risk management perspective, and most importantly for us as chartered accountants, accounting perspective. We did spoke about accounting aspects in different slides, but just putting together all of it. Globally, what has happened? Globally, IASB, right? Which why we are referring IASB here? Because our Ind AS is our converged IFRSs, right? We have taken it from the IAS and made the necessary changes to adopt to an Indian economy. If you look at from an IASB side, IASB was quite early in the accounting guidance release timing perspective. Pretty early, they released two sets of guidances, and both are effective now. One is phase 1 and one is phase 2. Now, what is phase 1? You can think about it. I think we're saying December 2021 is where the entire LIBOR sunset will happen. Basically, the existing IBOR will end and the new set of alternative reference rates will be available to all of you. And that's the time when I might have to look at, okay, I already have an existing loan, which has already been taken before 2021. It is linked to an instrument, it's linked to an exchange much before a new particular alternative reference rate has been issued, which means now my point is that how do I deal with an existing instruments before this entire transition is going to be effective? So that was phase 1 guidance. What do you do with existing balance sheet items, right? The second is, okay, once you now move to a new alternative reference rate, you will have you will have the new loans, you will have the new instruments, you will have new guidances that comes up, like new rates that is applicable, which means everything is starting to go new. Now, how do you apply the guidances post this transition? So the phases for divided basis, pre-transition and post-transition, and both of these phases are effective. I think I do not really want to touch upon hedge accounting so much, but I can give you simple principles of how they wanted to do this. Let's say if I have a loan in the balance sheet and the interest rate is going to Mangrish point LIBOR plus 100 basis points. Right now, this particular loan, like what we would have done if I'm an Ind AS company, I would have applied EIR, effective interest rate, considering the transaction cost, right, considering the processing fee, all of those elements into it. And we would have started amortizing the interest in a particular pattern. So now that this interest rate is changing, the question that arises is, should I now call it as a modification of a loan? And because of this modification, should I have to now relook at those 10% criteria and start de-recognizing the loan? If it is a substantial modification. If it is not a substantial modification, then should I start making the adjustments to my loan and carry on the value of my loan by bringing the carrying value differences, right? by applying those 10% criteria. But if you have to do that, the question which everybody is having is, I never wanted to change, right? So what is modification is a mutual exchange of terms and conditions. We change terms mutually, but this is happening because of a force fit. It's not something which I would want to change, but I'm changing it because someone is forcing it on me. Hence, now, should I need to do modification accounting and change the carrying value of an asset or a liability? The question, this was a question, and what's the answer that is coming up? If your cash flows are not substantially going to change, and if you're able to achieve an economic equivalence, which means your overall cash flows are representing your pre-transition value, which means it's not a modification, though your interest rate would have been changed. But do not call it as a modification and change the carrying value of an asset. What you can do is adjustment to interest and do an interest accounting prospectively. Which means what you're treating this is, you're treating it to be like how it is a floating rate instrument, and to the floating rate instrument, if there's a change that happens, how do I account that change in an EIR model? Just account it in the same way. Do not bring the concept of the modification and try make the carrying value adjustment. But having said that, if you are not able to achieve that economic equivalence, now what is economic equivalence? They've not defined. They've not given us the ways to compute economic equivalence. But if you are saying that it seems not economically equivalent, post and a pre-transition, I'm not able to bring that bring that consistency or say that this is one and the same, in that case I'll have to go for modification accounting. The second thing they're saying is, okay, if you're changing only a fallback language, everything remains the same, my interest rate will not change at all, but the only change I'm doing is contractual fallback language, like I'm moving from one exchange to another exchange. Yes, there is a change in the contract, but then it doesn't really change my cash flows per se. Hence, it's saying do not bother. You can actually start continuing to account what you've been accounting for. So some of these are practical experience given by IASB in order to give relief to the accountants that, okay, because of this IBOR transition across the globe, there will be issues around modification of financial instruments, hedge effectiveness testing, designation of hedging instruments, de-designation of hedging instruments. If I'm saying that, okay, I did hedging instrument designation considering a criteria, now that the entire transition is resulting into a different value to that particular hedging instrument, now should I start calling it as, a revised instrument, a new instrument, and start doing hedges again? So then there are practical experience around to say that at what point of time you would designate or de-designate a hedging instrument basis whether there is a value transfer or not. So in simple words, these are some of the accounting aspects which IASB is talking about. I think even if you look at more from a hedge accounting perspective, if one is doing a dollar offset method and computing the effectiveness test in the bucket of 80 to 125%, because of this particular IBOR transition, you're moving away from this. The IASB is giving a slight relief that if it's only an account of IBOR transition and if certain criteria are met, I think you're okay slightly being not in that particular distribution curve. Since these are more or less, there are multiple disclosure requirements which are coming up on account of IBOR transitions under Ind AS 107, which Manglesh will talk about. But from an IFRS 7 perspective, IAS 39 point of view, there'll be numerous disclosures that one has to do in the financial statements. Maybe I'll pause here, allow Manglesh to give what's exactly happening in the AS side.
Yeah. So thanks, Asha. So from that perspective, one important consideration. So as Asha was briefly mentioned here, right? So there is a pre-replacement issue and the replacement issue. So why there was a need for pre-replacement? So for example, if you have a hedge accounting relationship, right? So if I am doing a hedge accounting, and if I take an example of a cash flow hedge, where we say the highly probable forecast transactions. If I'm doing a hedge accounting for example, my currency receivables or a trade receivables for that matter, which are in US dollars. If I'm doing a cash flow transaction for that, and everything is reference to LIBOR, right? My forward contract is reference to LIBOR. It should not result that there is an uncertainty. And if there is an uncertainty, I am not able to say that it's highly. So there might be an issue with the hedge accounting. So the pre-replacement issue tries to address all those situations because of the uncertainty which is there in terms of the LIBOR replacement. It's not the LIBOR replaced, it is not already replaced, but there is an uncertainty which is being created. How do you address that uncertainty? And the replacement issues basically in the context of when it will get replaced. So exactly what ISB did, similar amendments were done for NDS in terms of, if you see on the 24th of July, we have this amendment to NDS which clearly articulates as to what are those things which you need to do from the disclosure perspective, because they've amended NDS 107, which is equivalent to IFRS 7 from the disclosure perspective as to what measures you would take while you are moving from the LIBOR regime to the alternate reference regime. What are the instruments which are getting impacted on your balance sheet? You need to make those disclosures, and existing hedging relationships will not be discontinued only if this is because of the uncertainty in the moving from the LIBOR rates to the alternate reference rates. There are replacement issues in the context of IFRS 9. Like, one point is very important, right? Because we are moving from LIBOR to an alternate reference rate, will that amount to be not meeting the SPPI test or the solely for payment of principal and interest criteria under IFRS 9 or the financial instruments? We all have instruments on our balance sheet. If they are referenced to LIBOR, or the loans which are referenced to LIBOR, will they fail the SPPI test? That is also somebody have to. An introspection will have to be done, analysis have to be done, examination has to be done. So that is all forming part of the replacement issues. Like similarly, like Asha spoke, we will have to take this change as just a step up to an EIR. So you are making this change as not a modification, but you are just considering as if at every reset, if you are on the variable rate loan, every reset the rate of interest is changing, and you are making that adjustment, right? Prospect. So in this case also it will happen in the similar manner, except in a scenario where under the grab of LIBOR change, you should not undertake a change in terms of the credit spread, or you should not change the term of the instrument, in particularly the term of the contract. So any such changes, if you do, then definitely there is a possibility of you encountering a substantial modification. And similarly, it also goes the standard on IFRS 16, where equivalent standard is NDS 116. The changes are similar in the sense if the changes also pertain to other areas and not just the incremental borrowing rate, which is reference to LIBOR. If I'm making any changes to the contract, it may have to be assessed whether there is a lease modification. So exact changes which is done by ISB, the pre-replacement issue, are already incorporated under NDS under 24th of July 2020 notification by amending the rules. The replacement issues which are touched upon, as I said, on the context of IFRS 9, IFRS 7, and NDS 116, which is equivalent to IFRS 16 to a certain extent, of course. Those changes are right now in the exposure draft form, which is there with the ASB of ICAI, and which is open to comments till 30th of November. Once they get notified, we would be at par with what ISB has done from the international or the IFRS jurisdiction perspective. Exact similar situation will be done from the NDS perspective to take care of all those corporates who are already on NDS.
I think that's more from accounting point of view. I guess we are almost on time. We have 5 minutes, so we can see if there are some questions in the chat box that we can take. So there's one question Suma is asking, please let us know which guidance note technical interpretation to refer on this matter for other than NDS companies. That's the good question. Manglish, you want to answer, like what will the other than NDS companies have to do? There is, I think they have to draw reference, right?
Right. So right now, this is a very good question, and this is actually grappling the entire corporate as well as banks in particular also, because banks are also not moving to NDS in India, and so are insurance companies. So at this point in time, the reference point here is either the PRA or the US jurisdiction. So we cannot do a copy paste here because our nuances, our jurisdiction is totally different. So as I said, to keep it long story short, at this point in time, the reference in this case is US and UK, and UK more so because we are more closer from the jurisdiction or the jurisprudence perspective and the laws and regulations perspective. So we're more referring from the UK perspective for all the guidances, and India's, of course, because India's gets amended, and which is what has happened. India's is a standard which is there already in India, so we always refer to the higher standard, and which is near to your jurisdiction. India's definitely is, so we will refer to India's. Wherever there is no guidance from the operational perspective, we are relying definitely on the international jurisdiction, be it PRA guidance or be it ARRC guidance in US.
One other thing which I just wanted to add to your point. I think if you look at overall from the sorry. So if you're taking from the Indian companies per context, right, like the one who's still in AS and not moved to Ind-AS, financial instruments as a whole is not a mature topic right now, right? Because we had AS 30, 31, 32 at some point of time at a recommendatory stage, and then India moved and then said, we do not want to have it, and it's been withdrawn. So the companies which are not under Ind-AS, or the 30, 31, 32, which were like fairly equivalent to IFRSs, has not even been referred. So the biggest worry that arises here is, is that's exactly the point I was raising. That is your client who, for some reason, is not under Ind-AS, but they do have huge amount of loans, because for Ind-AS, I look at net worth criteria, and and the debt is actually in my balance sheet. If I've not really been an Ind-AS client, but I've got a huge ECBs and huge amount of external external loans or any loans which are referred to these IBORs, what is the guidance? The answer is very gray, right? So this is exactly where I think most of these corporates have to think about, maybe should it make sense for them to first of all move to Ind-AS? Nobody do it. For an accounting issue, nobody does it. Or maybe now ICAI has to think about amending the guidance note on derivatives, but that will be just derivatives, right? We do not have a guidance note on how to treat loans, EIR related matters, transaction cost, fair value through P&L, fair value through OCI. This has not been addressed in the guidance note yet. The guidance note is only addressing derivatives. So will they then bring some amendments to that guidance note more from a derivatives perspective? Maybe we can expect, but from the overall standard perspective, it is, I think, they can take a slightly lot of judgments, but it's up to the auditor to see what kind of references is this client is taken from, right? I mean, so have they gone to Ind-AS, IFRS, or US GAAP, or where are they borrowing the entire literature from, so that it reflects some authoritative guidance? Otherwise, the clients generally would fall back to the judgments. It becomes difficult. If that happens, then it's slightly tricky, more from an audit angle. That's what I would want to say. It's a very good question. I guess we are good. Any other questions? So if there are no questions, we can end right on time. We have one more question from Murali Mohan. From taxation perspective, can you elaborate how it will impact a little more elaboratively? As of now, there is absolutely no guidance from a taxation perspective, but I think if we kind of go from a taxation angle, what would change, right? Those interest elements will change on account of LIBOR. Cash flows will change on account of LIBOR. So you can think about wherever there is an impact on account of change in cash flows and change in interest and change in fair values, all of those places, I guess we'll have to look at it, taxation from an existing guidance perspective. I don't think so. There is no specific reference in taxation on account of IBOR change, no immediate relaxations, right? Or I think it is falling back to an accounting guidance back. Whatever we are doing currently in Ind-AS, to the extent of all other Ind-AS adjustments that we will give from a taxation angle, that would continue. But from a core tax perspective, Mangrish, you will have anything to add on? There's nothing that I'm aware of at this point of time.
So core tax perspective, of course, corporates at this point in time, we've not had a clear case where we're discussing this matter, but from the bank's perspective, certainly it has certain implications, and that is what I was referring to from the funds transfer pricing perspective. So there are transfer pricing aspects which need to be looked at, and that is where, because if you recollect all those comparable transactions, right? So comparable price and all those things aspect will have to be looked at, but that's more from the transfer pricing perspective. And certainly we have not come across any issue pertaining to corporate, certainly because they've not actually looked into it. There could be some issues, but at the same time, I would not comment on those aspects.
It's not been in limelight also. Exactly. like slightly matured in those angles. It becomes very subjective to comment on that. But I think the existing guidances is what we have to apply. There's no new guidance as such. Perfect. I hope that answers, I know not a very happy answer, but this is what it is. Maybe after 6 months, Manglish, we can be back if we have much more clarity across. As I was saying, we don't have clarity on Indies. Largely, we do have some, but not really. But I think this will take slightly some time for sure. All right, so this is all from our side. Thank you so much for ICI Bangalore branch for giving us this opportunity, and thanks for all the members for taking time and watching this. It's been a pleasure having this session. Thanks,
Yeah, thank
Mangesh.
you so much. Thank you so much, Bangalore branch of SRC. Thank you, and really happy to be part of it. Thank you. Thanks, Asha.
Thank you, madam. We had an excellent session and a very interesting topic. Thanks for joining both of you, Mangesh sir and Asha madam, and enlightening our members on this cyber subject. I thank on behalf of Bangalore branch of ICA for sharing your knowledge. And I also thank all the participants who actively participated in this program. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you.